Book 6, Chapter 15, Of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 15. Natasha had not had a moment free since early morning, and had not once had time to think of what lay before her. In the damp chill air and crowded closeness of the swaying carriage, she for the first time vividly imagined what was in store for her there at the ball, in those brightly lighted rooms, with music, flowers, dances, the Emperor, and all the brilliant young people of Petersburg. The prospect was so splendid that she hardly believed it would come true, so out of keeping was it with the chill darkness and closeness of the carriage. She understood all that awaited her only when, after stepping over the red baize at the entrance, she entered the hall, took off her fur cloak, and beside Sonia, in front of her mother, mounted the brightly illuminated stairs between the flowers. Only then did she remember how she must behave at a ball, and try to assume the majestic air she considered indispensable for a girl on such an occasion. But fortunately for her, she felt her eyes growing misty. She saw nothing clearly, her pulse beat 100 to the minute, and the blood throbbed at her heart. She could not assume that pose, which would have made her ridiculous, and she moved on almost fainting from excitement, and trying with all her might to conceal it. And this was the very attitude that became her best. Before and behind them other visitors were entering, also talking in low tones and wearing ball dresses. The mirrors on the landing reflected ladies in white, pale blue, and pink dresses, with diamonds and pearls on their bare necks and arms. Natasha looked in the mirrors and could not distinguish her reflection from the others. All was blended into one brilliant procession. On entering the ballroom, the regular hum of voices, footsteps, and greetings deafened Natasha, and the light and glitter dazzled her still more. The host and hostess, who had already been standing at the door for half an hour repeating the same words to the various arrivals, "Charmé de vous voir," "Delighted to see you," greeted the Rostovs and Perenskaya in the same manner. The two girls in their white dresses, each with a rose in her black hair, both curtsied in the same way, but the hostess' eye involuntarily rested longer on the slim Natasha. She looked at her and gave her alone a special smile in addition to her usual smile as hostess. Looking at her, she may have recalled the golden, irrecoverable days of her own girlhood and her own first ball. The host also followed Natasha with his eyes, and asked the Count which was his daughter. "Charming," said he, kissing the tips of his fingers. In the ballroom, guests stood crowding at the entrance doors awaiting the Emperor. The Countess took up a position in one of the front rows of that crowd. Natasha heard and felt that several people were asking about her and looking at her. She realized that those noticing her liked her, and this observation helped to calm her. "There are some like ourselves, and some worse," she thought. Perenskaya was pointing out to the Countess the most important people at the ball. "That is the Dutch ambassador, do you see? That grey-haired man," she said, indicating an old man with a profusion of silver-grey curly hair, who was surrounded by ladies laughing at something he said. "Ah, here she is, the Queen of Petersburg, Countess Bezúkhova," said Perenskaya, indicating Elaine, who had just entered. "How lovely! She is quite equal to Marya Antonovna. See how the men, young and old, pay court to her, beautiful and clever. They say Prince is quite mad about her, but see, those two, though not good-looking, are even more run after." She pointed to a lady who was crossing the room, followed by a very plain daughter. "She is a splendid match, a millionairess," said Perenskaya. "And look, here come her suitors." "That is Bezúkhova's brother, Anatole Kurágin," she said, indicating a handsome officer of the Horse Guards, who was passing by them with head erect, looking at something over the heads of the ladies. "He's handsome, isn't he? I hear they will marry him to that rich girl. But your cousin Drubetskoy is also very attentive to her. They say she has millions." "Oh yes, that's the French ambassador himself," she replied to the Countess' inquiry about Caulaincourt. "Looks as if he were a king. All the same, the French are charming, very charming. No one more charming in society. Ah, here she is. Yes, she is still the most beautiful of them all, our Marya Antonovna. And how simply she is dressed. Lovely. And that stout one in spectacles is the universal Freemason," she went on, indicating Pierre. "Put him beside his wife, and he looks a regular buffoon." Pierre, swaying his stout body, advanced, making way through the crowd and nodding to right and left as casually and good-naturedly as if he were passing through a crowd at a fair. He pushed through, evidently looking for someone. Natasha looked joyfully at the familiar face of Pierre, the buffoon, as Peronskaya had called him, and knew he was looking for them, and for her in particular. He had promised to be at the ball and introduce partners to her. But before he reached them, Pierre stopped beside a very handsome, dark man of middle height, and in a white uniform, who stood by a window talking to a tall man wearing stars and a ribbon. Natasha at once recognized the shorter and younger man in the white uniform. It was Bolkonsky, who seemed to her to have grown much younger, happier, and better looking. "There's someone else we know. Bolkonsky, do you see, Mamma?" said Natasha, pointing out Prince Andrew. "You remember, he stayed a night with us at Otradno." "Oh, you know him?" said Peronskaya. "I can't bear him. Il fait à présent la pluie et le beau temps. He is all the rage just now. He's too proud for anything. Takes after his father. And he's hand in glove with Speransky, writing some project or other. Just look how he treats the ladies. There's one talking to him, and he has turned away," she said, pointing at him. "I'd give it to him if he treated me as he does those ladies." End of Book 6, Chapter 15. Book 6, Chapter 16 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 16. Suddenly everybody stirred, began talking, and pressed forward and then back, and between the two rows, which separated, the Emperor entered to the sounds of music that had immediately struck up. Behind him walked his host and hostess. He walked in rapidly, bowing to right and left as if anxious to get the first moments of the reception over. The band played the polonaise in vogue at that time on account of the words that had been set to it, beginning, "Alexander, Elisaveta, all our hearts you ravish quite." The Emperor passed on to the drawing-room. The crowd made a rush for the doors, and several persons with excited faces hurried there and back again. Then the crowd hastily retired from the drawing-room door, at which the Emperor reappeared talking to the hostess. A young man, looking distraught, pounced down on the ladies, asking them to move aside. Some ladies, with faces betraying complete forgetfulness of all the rules of decorum, pushed forward to the detriment of their toilettes. The men began to choose partners and take their places for the polonaise. Everyone moved back, and the Emperor came smiling out of the drawing-room leading his hostess by the hand, but not keeping time to the music. The host followed with Marya Antonovna Narishkina. Then came ambassadors, ministers, and various generals, whom Peronskaya diligently named. More than half the ladies already had partners and were taking up, or preparing to take up, their positions for the polonaise. Natasha felt that she would be left with her mother and Sonia among a minority of women who crowded near the wall, not having been invited to dance. She stood with her slender arms hanging down, her scarcely defined bosom rising and falling regularly, and with bated breath and glittering, frightened eyes, gazed straight before her, evidently prepared for the height of joy or misery. She was not concerned about the Emperor or any of those great people whom Peronskaya was pointing out. She had but one thought: "Is it possible no one will ask me, that I shall not be among the first to dance? Is it possible that not one of all these men will notice me? They do not even seem to see me, or if they do, they look as if they were saying, 'Ah, she's not the one I'm after, so it's not worth looking at her.' No, it's impossible," she thought. "They must know how I long to dance, How splendidly I dance, and how they would enjoy dancing with me." The strains of the Polonaise, which had continued for a considerable time, had begun to sound like a sad reminiscence to Natasha's ears. She wanted to cry. Peronskaya had left them. The Count was at the other end of the room. She and the Countess and Sonia were standing by themselves, as in the depths of a forest amid that crowd of strangers, with no one interested in them and not wanted by anyone. Prince Andrew with the lady passed by, evidently not recognizing them. The handsome Anatole was smilingly talking to a partner on his arm, and looked at Natasha as one looks at a wall. Boris passed them twice, and each time turned away. Berg and his wife, who were not dancing, came up to them. This family gathering seemed humiliating to Natasha, as if there were nowhere else for the family to talk but here at the ball. She did not listen to or look at Vera, who was telling her something about her own green dress. At last the Emperor stopped beside his last partner. He had danced with 3, and the music ceased. A worried aide-de-camp ran up to the Rostovs, requesting them to stand farther back, though, as it was, they were already close to the wall, and from the gallery resounded the distinct, precise, enticingly rhythmical strains of a waltz. The Emperor looked smilingly down the room. A minute passed, but no one had yet begun dancing. An aide-de-camp, the master of ceremonies, went up to Countess Bezúkhova and asked her to dance. She smilingly raised her hand and laid it on his shoulder without looking at him. The aide-de-camp, an adept in his art, grasping his partner firmly round her waist, with confident deliberation started smoothly, gliding first round the edge of the circle. Then, at the corner of the room, he caught Elaine's left hand and turned her, the only sound audible, apart from the ever-quickening music, being the rhythmic click of the spurs on his rapid, agile feet, while at every third beat his partner's velvet dress spread out and seemed to flash as she whirled round. Natasha gazed at them and was ready to cry because it was not she who was dancing that first turn of the waltz. Prince Andrew, in the white uniform of a cavalry colonel, wearing stockings and dancing shoes, stood looking animated and bright in the front row of the circle not far from the Rostovs. Baron Furhoff was talking to him about the first sitting of the Council of State to be held next day. Prince Andrew, as one closely connected with Speransky and participating in the work of the Legislative Commission, could give reliable information about that sitting, concerning which various rumors were current. But not listening to what Furhoff was saying, he was gazing now at the sovereign and now at the men intending to dance, who had not yet gathered courage to enter the circle. Prince Andrew was watching these men abashed by the Emperor's presence, and the women who were breathlessly longing to be asked to dance. Pierre came up to him and caught him by the arm. "You always dance. I have a protégée, the young Rostova here. Ask her," he said. "Where is she?" asked Bolkonsky. "Excuse me," he added, turning to the Baron. "We will finish this conversation elsewhere. At a ball one must dance." He stepped forward in the direction Pierre indicated. The despairing, dejected expression of Natasha's face caught his eye. He recognized her, guessed her feelings, saw that it was her debut, remembered her conversation at the window, and with an expression of pleasure on his face approached Countess Rostova. "Allow me to introduce you to my daughter," said the Countess with heightened color. "I have the pleasure of being already acquainted, if the Countess remembers me," said Prince Andrew with a low and courteous bow quite belying Peronskaya's remarks about his rudeness, and approaching Natasha, he held out his arm to grasp her waist before he had completed his invitation. He asked her to waltz. That tremulous expression on Natasha's face, prepared either for despair or rapture, suddenly brightened into a happy, grateful, childlike smile. "I have long been waiting for you," that frightened, happy little girl seemed to say by the smile that replaced the threatened tears, as she raised her hand to Prince Andrew's shoulder. They were the second couple to enter the circle. Prince Andrew was one of the best dancers of his day, and Natasha danced exquisitely. Her little feet in their white satin dancing shoes did their work swiftly, lightly, and independently of herself, while her face beamed with ecstatic happiness. Her slender bare arms and neck were not beautiful, Compared to Elaine's, her shoulders looked thin and her bosom undeveloped. But Elaine seemed, as it were, hardened by a varnish left by the thousands of looks that had scanned her person, while Natasha was like a girl exposed for the first time, who would have felt very much ashamed had she not been assured that this was absolutely necessary. Prince Andrew liked dancing, and wishing to escape as quickly as possible from the political and clever talk which everyone addressed to him, wishing also to break up the circle of restraint he disliked caused by the Emperor's presence, he danced, and had chosen Natasha because Pierre pointed her out to him, and because she was the first pretty girl who caught his eye. But scarcely had he embraced that slender, supple figure and felt her stirring so close to him and smiling so near him, than the wine of her charm rose to his head, and he felt himself revived and rejuvenated when, after leaving her, he stood breathing deeply and watching the other dancers. End of Book 6, Chapter 16. Book 6, Chapter 17, of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 17. After Prince Andrew, Boris came up to ask Natasha for a dance, and then the aide-de-camp who had opened the ball, and several other young men, so that, flushed and happy and passing on her superfluous partners to Sonia, she did not cease dancing all the evening. She noticed and saw nothing of what occupied everyone else. Not only did she fail to notice that the Emperor talked a long time with the French ambassador, and how particularly gracious he was to a certain lady, or that Prince so-and-so and so-and-so did and said this and that Elaine had great success and was honored by the special attention of so-and-so, but she did not even see the Emperor, and only noticed that he had gone because the ball became livelier after his departure. For one of the merry cotillions before supper, Prince Andrew was again her partner. He reminded her of their first encounter in the Otradno Avenue, and how she had been unable to sleep that moonlight night, and told her how he had involuntarily overheard her. Natasha blushed at that recollection and tried to excuse herself, as if there had been something to be ashamed of in what Prince Andrew had overheard. Like all men who had grown up in society, Prince Andrew liked meeting someone there not of the conventional society stamp, and such was Natasha, with her surprise, her delight, her shyness, and even her mistakes in speaking French. With her he behaved with special care and tenderness, sitting beside her and talking of the simplest and most unimportant matters. He admired her shy grace. In the middle of the cotillion, having completed one of the figures, Natasha, still out of breath, was returning to her seat when another dancer chose her. She was tired and panting, and evidently thought of declining, but immediately put her hand gaily on the man's shoulder, smiling at Prince Andrew. "I'd be glad to sit beside you and rest. I'm tired, but you see how they keep asking me, and I'm glad of it. I'm happy, and I love everybody, and you and I understand it all." And much, much more was said in her smile. When her partner left her, Natasha ran across the room to choose two ladies for the figure. "If she goes to her cousin first, and then to another lady, she will be my wife," said Prince Andrew to himself, quite to his own surprise, as he watched her. She did go first to her cousin. "What rubbish sometimes enters one's head," thought Prince Andrew. "But what is certain is that that girl is so charming, so original, that she won't be dancing here a month before she will be married. Such as she are rare here," he thought, as Natasha, readjusting a rose that was slipping on her bodice, settled herself beside him. When the cotillion was over, the old Count in his blue coat came up to the dancers. He invited Prince Andrew to come and see them, and asked his daughter whether she was enjoying herself. Natasha did not answer at once, but only looked up with a smile that said reproachfully, "How can you ask such a question?" "I have never enjoyed myself so much before," she said, and Prince Andrew noticed how her thin arms rose quickly as if to embrace her father and instantly dropped again. Natasha was happier than she had ever been in her life. She was at that height of bliss when one becomes completely kind and good, and does not believe in the possibility of evil, unhappiness, or sorrow. At that ball, Pierre for the first time felt humiliated by the position his wife occupied in court circles. He was gloomy and absent-minded. A deep furrow ran across his forehead, and standing by a window he stared over his spectacles, seeing no one. On her way to supper, Natasha passed him. Pierre's gloomy, unhappy look struck her. She stopped in front of him. She wished to help him, to bestow on him the superabundance of her own happiness. "How delightful it is, Count," said she. "Isn't it?" Pierre smiled absent-mindedly, evidently not grasping what she said. "Yes, I am very glad," he said. "How can people be dissatisfied with anything?" thought Natasha. "Especially such a capital fellow as Bezúkhov." In Natasha's eyes, all the people at the ball alike were good, kind, and splendid people loving one another, none of them capable of injuring another, and so they ought all to be happy. End of Book 6, Chapter 17.